to Boots and Bunny Homestead. We are back inside Casey's kitchen today. You're at a little bit of a different angle because I'm having to work on the opposite side of the kitchen. Got a lot going over there today. So I want to continue with the journey of showing you guys some einkorn flour recipes. And tonight we're actually going to do a sourdough einkorn recipe tonight. Now I've showed you guys that I have swapped over my sourdough starter to einkorn, which all I did was, of course, I was using King Arthur unbleached all-purpose flour, and then once I decided to swap over the einkorn, then what I did was I took just a heaping tablespoon of that starter with the regular flour in it, put it into a new container, and then just started feeding it with einkorn. And just like that, my battery dies. So, what I was saying is you can just start feeding it with the einkorn flour, and it will eventually outnumber the white and become full einkorn flour sourdough. So, what we're doing is using the einkorn flour sourdough starter, and we are going to make a pizza crust. Now, this will either make two 12 to 13 inch crusts, or you can make like one big one, say like a 16 inch or so. So I'm going to make one big one if I can, and I'm going to show you how to go through the steps of putting it all together. I'll have the recipe below. I did a lot of research on einkorn pizza crust. They all basically had the same amount of ingredients, you know, with flour, salt, water, all that kind of stuff. They all had the same amount of ingredients. So I started looking up the sourdough, since I need to go ahead and use some of this down, because I'm getting up to almost about a cup, and I want to use some of this discard to go ahead and use some of that down. Now, you can do this recipe one of two ways. I'll go ahead and tell you. You can use the sourdough starter, mix it all up, and let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then go ahead and use it. Or if you want to go ahead and allow that sourdough to ferment, you can leave it out on the counter for up to about 6 hours. That is totally your preference. I'm probably going to do between 2 and 3 hours just to let the whole dough ferment a little bit longer than just 30 minutes. Because we're going to be putting in almost 3.5 cups of the einkorn flour. So I want that to go ahead and have all of it to ferment and activate the nutrition in those ancient grains a little bit more, along with the benefits of the sourdough. So, like I said, I have the recipe linked below, and let's go ahead and start getting this mixed up. It is almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so allowing this to sit about 3 hours will be about the time that I'll get ready to start fixing supper. So, let's go ahead and get a medium-sized bowl so we can get it all mixed up. Okay, guys, I'm going to try to get you in the shot as best I can. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with 1 cup of the sourdough. And as long as it's enough to leave about a tablespoon, you can use all of it. Just like I said, leave about a tablespoon out. And that way you can go ahead and feed this just a little bit and stick it back in the refrigerator. Or if you want to go ahead and feed it for your next recipe, whichever you desire to do, whatever with your sourdough starter. So we're going to go ahead and measure this out. And I should end up with about a cup. Sourdough's kind of sticky. I had to get a spatula. Okay, so with what I have, and see, I only have enough in there just to pretty well coat the bottom of the jar. And so as long as you have an active starter, that will be enough for you to go ahead and start feeding your next batch. I'm going to set that to the side, and this is going to go into our bowl. It's not quite a cup, but that's okay, because as long as you get it close enough, the recipe will still work just fine. And we'll go ahead and pour this in our bowl. Now with sourdough, your starter is considered your yeast. That's why you do not use like a yeast packet. And so with this, you don't want to use water that is over 100 degrees. So for our next ingredient, we need to go ahead and add the water and the salt. Now, whenever we add the water in here, we need to thin this sourdough starter out, because if you put the flour directly on here, you're going to have clumps of sourdough and clumps that don't have sourdough. So that's why you want to add your water into your starter and then add your salt to it. And now some people say don't put salt on top of sourdough because it may kill some of the yeast, but you also don't want to put salt directly on top of regular like packaged yeast that you buy, because it will deteriorate that yeast. But with this one, because we're going to dilute it down with water, it's okay to go ahead and put some salt in it. Now if you need to, or if you want to, you can go ahead and put a tablespoon of sugar in here just to go ahead and activate the extra yeast to eat that sugar, and it will bubble up more. Otherwise, we're just going to feed it with our regular recipe with the flour and the water, just as you do a normal starter, and that should be sufficient enough. But it's totally up to you. If you want to add like a tablespoon of some kind of sweetener, you can do that at this time as well. So let's go ahead and add in the 3/4 cup of warm water. And like I said, we're going to stir this up to get it a little bit more thinned out, because that water will help the starter to absorb into the flour and get more evenly distributed throughout the flour as we're mixing this all together. Okay, so you see it's nice and foamy. Now for the salt, we're going to go ahead and add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And you can use a little bit less, like 1 teaspoon if you want, if you're worried about salt content. So let's get all this mixed in. Nice and thick. Kind of like a gravy consistency at this point. And then to this, we're going to go ahead and add 3 cups of flour. The recipe is going to say 3 1/4, but I want to have that quarter to play with, just in case it doesn't take all of the flour, because sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, depending on temperature, humidity, and that sort of thing. And now if you would like to sift this or weigh it out, some people do prefer to do that. You can do that as well. I do not have the measurements. You guys can do your research with that. Because I'm not really sure. I don't work with grams. Not very often. In some recipes I do. Alright, so we're going to stir this up. And remember that einkorn flour dough is very sticky, because it's different than regular flour, regular all-purpose flour that we're all used to using. And then it will actually, it doesn't absorb all of the water immediately. It does have to sit, and that's why we're going to allow this to sit for the 3 hours to go ahead and absorb that water. Looks like I'm just going to have to get dirty. With einkorn flour, you also don't want to knead it very much. You want to allow it time to rest, because it doesn't have normal gluten like flour has in it. Or it does have gluten, it doesn't have as much. And it's not today's gluten, so it's more tolerable for most people. It also does not need kneading, because kneading is the process of activating all of the gluten. And if you don't have the gluten in a certain flour, such as the einkorn, then it doesn't need a whole lot of kneading. If you over knead it or overwork it, it will actually fall flat after you bake it in bread, because you've overworked what gluten was in it and it's nothing left for the rise. Okay, so now what we're going to do, actually the 3 cups was perfect. I'm glad I didn't add another quarter, but we could work in the quarter a little bit later whenever we roll it out if we need to. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and cover this with some saran wrap. Let it set for, like I said, 2 to 3 hours. At this point, if you want to go ahead and make it in 30 minutes, you can. So we're going to let this sit here for a couple of hours. And if you wanted to do 2 hours first rise, punch it down, mix it just a little bit, probably 4 or 5 times. You can do that and let it rise for 2 more hours. It all depends on the timing that you have and what you want to do. But I'm going to go ahead and let this sit. If you want to cover this with just a little bit of oil, you can. I'm just going to cover it with saran wrap and push the center down to let the air escape out of it. And just let it sit over here on my stove for a couple of hours. And I will see you guys back then. Alright, so we are right about 3 hours. Here's our dough. Looks good. Little bubbling action going on down there. So I've got some parchment paper laid down because I want to pat this out, or you can roll it with a rolling pin if you want to. And then that way we can take this and flip it over onto our pizza pan, because I don't have a stone. I'm going to use a pizza pan right here. And I want to be able, since that has holes in the bottom of it, I want to be able to get this flattened out best I can. And then once I spray the pan and flip it over, then I'll be able to put a little bit of oil on the pizza crust, because they say you can put you can put a little bit of oil over top of the pizza crust, and that the sauce won't soak in and make it soggy. So I've got parchment paper here and I've got it rolled out. So now we've got to take our dough out and roll it out. Let's see what it smells like. It smells so good. Einkorn does have a little bit stronger of a smell. I don't have a bowl scraper. I really need to get one. Yeah, you can see the holes up here. There's that webbing, the sourdough webbing. You see right there. So that means it is good and fermented. Alright, so if you would like, you can get the rolling pin out and go ahead and roll this out. Or you can just go ahead and use your hand, whichever you prefer. You can also cut this in half and make 2 smaller pizza crusts, whichever you prefer. You can make this rectangle or circular, whatever pan you want to put it on. And if it comes apart, if you get any thin spots, just squeeze it back together. That is the size. Now if you're putting this on a cookie sheet, you can leave it on the parchment paper if you would like, or you can use the parchment paper to flip it over and lay down some cornmeal. You'll see in the recipe below that it calls for a little bit of cornmeal. Since this has holes in it, it's one of these air bakes, I'm just going to, I lightly sprayed it because it's so old it's not really non-stick anymore. But I went ahead and sprayed it with some oil, and I'm just going to go ahead and put my crust on top of here and preheat the oven to 450, and then we're going to bake it for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and put our toppings on it and bake it for 10 more minutes. So let's get this flipped over. Then go ahead and stretch it to the size of your pan. Mine is pretty well there. A couple little thin spots. And if you want, go ahead and make your edging. You can go ahead and make you a little bit of an edge to kind of hold all the toppings in. You can do this in a glass dish if you want to make like a deep dish. You can do it on a cookie sheet if you want to do it that way. Mine tend to be pretty thick, so I'm going to go ahead and make my edges about 1 inch deep. And you could, you do have enough with this one pizza crust here. If you're making a large one like this, you could even go ahead and do stuffed crust. Or you can make 2 smaller ones and still have enough to do the crust. So there it is, and we're going to preheat the oven, like I said, to 450 and cook this for about 10 minutes. Okay, I've been cooking some extra tomatoes that I had to get cooked pretty quick. I have cooked up a pizza sauce here all day, well, at least for the last 5 hours or so. And it is really thick, so I'm going to move that off the eye because I actually have some ground deer that I'm going to brown. I'm going to do some barbecue and also some pepperoni on this pizza. So I've got to get my meat cooked while the oven is preheating and while the pizza crust is cooking. So I'll be ready to fix all the toppings as soon as it's done. Look at that, look at that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let this cool off for about 5 minutes or so, kind of let everything rest and marry all together. And then we're going to cut it and see what it tastes like. So you see there's not much left. We enjoyed it. It is very crispy on the outside, on the bottom. And it is that sourdough chewy around the outside, around the crust. But it is very, very good. It tastes really, really good. Now, I will go ahead and make another just plain einkorn flour and not sourdough. I will make that coming up pretty soon because we try not to eat a whole lot of the flour products. So it may be a week or two before I actually make another pizza. But I do want to make just a plain einkorn flour pizza crust as well and see if we would like that better. So like I said, I'm trying all these recipes out to see what works, what don't, and I'm bringing you along for the journey. So this one is a winner, but I will go ahead and try it without being sourdough, and we will compare and see about that on the next video for pizza crust. So I've got the recipe down below, and I hope you guys enjoyed. We will see you later. Bye.